March 27th, 1945. 02:14 hours. Shimonoseki Strait, the narrow waterway connecting the Sea of Japan to the inland sea. Captain Takeshi Nakamura stands on the bridge of the cargo vessel Hakone Maru, his hands gripping the brass compass binnacle as his ship approaches the strait entrance. The 5,200-ton freighter carries 3,800 tons of rice from Korea, enough to feed 190,000 Tokyo residents for 1 week. Below decks, the engine room crew maintains 8 knots through waters Nakamura has navigated 47 times since 1942 without incident. The strait measures only 2,300 feet wide at its narrowest point, forcing all traffic into predictable channels that Japanese naval planners have protected with coastal batteries, patrol boats, and observation posts on both shores. The moon hangs 3/4 full over the Korean hills to starboard. At 02:17 hours, Hakone Maru's hull strikes something solid 18 feet below the waterline. The impact tears a 12-foot gash through the number 2 hold, admitting seawater at a rate exceeding the ship's pumping capacity. Nakamura orders emergency reverse engines, but the propeller shaft has been damaged by the explosion's shockwave. The freighter begins settling by the bow. Within 8 minutes, Hakone Maru rests on the bottom in 47 feet of water, her superstructure protruding above the surface, blocking 1/3 of the navigable channel. The crew evacuates safely to patrol boats, but the rice cargo is a total loss, and the wreck creates a navigation hazard that will require weeks to clear. What Captain Nakamura doesn't know is that his ship has just encountered the opening salvo of Operation Starvation, a mining campaign that will sink or damage 670 Japanese vessels, close every major harbour, and collapse Japan's economy without dropping a single conventional bomb on a city. The weapon that destroyed Hakone Maru was an American Mark 25 magnetic acoustic mine, one of 12,053 that B-29 superfortresses will drop around Japan between March and August 1945. The mine cost $2,347 to manufacture, including the explosive charge, sensors, and shipping from the Naval Ordnance Plant in Alexandria, Virginia. Clearing it from Shimonoseki Strait will require 3 minesweepers working for 11 days at a total operational cost exceeding $187,000, assuming Japanese forces possessed adequate minesweeping equipment, which they increasingly do not. This cost differential represents the mathematics of maritime siege warfare in its purest form. The strategic calculus is devastating and elegant. Japan imports 88% of its coal, 90% of its oil, 82% of its iron ore, and 85% of its food through merchant shipping that must pass through a handful of predictable choke points. Close those choke points and the entire economy collapses, regardless of how many soldiers Japan has in the field or how determined its citizens are to resist invasion. The origins of Operation Starvation trace to December 1944, when strategic planners at the Pentagon were calculating the costs of invading Japan. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion, would require 1.5 million American troops, produce estimated casualties between 400,000 and 800,000 for American forces alone, and extend the war into late 1946. Major General Curtis LeMay's incendiary bombing campaign had demonstrated that cities could be destroyed, but Japanese military resistance showed no signs of collapsing despite massive civilian casualties. Strategic bombing was killing tens of thousands, but not achieving surrender. The Army Air Forces needed an alternative approach that would strangle Japan's capacity to wage war by attacking not its willingness to fight, but its to sustain industrial operations. Lieutenant Commander Ellis A. Johnson, a Naval Reserve officer with a doctorate in mathematics from MIT, proposed a solution that seemed almost too simple. Japan was an island nation with virtually no domestic resources. Every calorie eaten, every gallon of fuel burned, every ton of steel produced came from imports transported by merchant shipping through waters that could be mined from the air. The Japanese merchant marine in December 1944 consisted of approximately 2.8 million tons of shipping, down from 6.4 million tons at the war's start. American submarines had already demonstrated the vulnerability of Japanese shipping, sinking 1,178 vessels, totaling 4.9 million tons through November 1944. But submarines required crews, fuel, maintenance, and faced increasing danger from Japanese anti-submarine defenses that had improved significantly after 3 years of combat experience. Aerial mining offered different mathematics. A single B-29 could carry 7 2,000-pound Mark 25 mines or 14 1,000-pound Mark 26 mines. Each mine, once planted, became an autonomous weapon that required no crew, consumed no fuel, and operated continuously until either it sank a ship or Japanese minesweepers located and neutralized it. The key technical innovation was the influence mine, a weapon that detonated not from physical contact, but by sensing changes in magnetic fields or acoustic signatures created by passing ships. These mines could be dropped in shallow harbors, channels, and straits where their sensors would detect vessels overhead, while the mines themselves rested invisibly on the bottom, immune to visual detection from surface ships. The Mark 25 mine represented the culmination of 4 years of American weapons development. The weapon consisted of a cylindrical steel casing measuring 10 feet 6 inches long and 24 inches in diameter, weighing 2,000 pounds, including 1,250 pounds of Torpex explosive. Torpex, a mixture of RDX, TNT, and aluminum powder developed by British researchers, delivered 50% more destructive power than pure TNT. The mine's sensor suite included both magnetic and acoustic detection systems that could be programmed to ignore small vessels like patrol boats while detonating beneath larger merchant ships and warships. This selectivity meant that Japanese minesweeping efforts, which relied on small wooden boats dragging acoustic hammers and magnetic coils, often failed to trigger the mines they were trying to clear. The magnetic sensor detected distortions in Earth's magnetic field caused by steel hulls passing overhead. The sensor used a magnetometer so sensitive that it could distinguish between ships of different sizes based on the magnitude of magnetic field change. Larger ships with more steel created bigger distortions and triggered the mine from greater distances. The acoustic sensor detected pressure waves created by ship propellers and machinery. Different ship types created distinct acoustic signatures, frequencies, and patterns that varied based on propeller design, engine speed, and hull shape. The mine's circuitry could be programmed to ignore certain signatures while responding to others, making it effectively invisible to Japanese minesweeping gear designed to trigger simpler contact mines. Manufacturing these sophisticated weapons required industrial capabilities that Japan could not match. The magnetometer components required precision coil winding and calibration performed at facilities in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. The acoustic sensors incorporated technologies developed at Bell Laboratories and Western Electric. The Torpex explosive was produced at facilities in Tennessee and Oklahoma that had been built specifically for advanced munitions production. The final assembly occurred at the Naval Mine Depot in Yorktown, Virginia, where each mine underwent testing in specially constructed water-filled chambers that simulated harbor conditions. Total production cost per mine averaged $2,347, with monthly production reaching 2,400 units by March 1945. Japan's entire annual military budget in 1945 was approximately $4.5 billion. The Mark 25 program cost $28 million and would destroy shipping worth over $800 million, while effectively closing ports whose economic value exceeded $12 billion annually. The mining campaign required specialized delivery methods because the mines had to enter the water at precise angles and speeds to avoid damage. Dropping a 2,000-pound weapon from 8,000 feet at 250 knots creates impact forces that would shatter conventional explosives and damage sensors. The mines incorporated parachute retardation systems that deployed immediately after release, slowing the weapon to approximately 40 feet per second terminal velocity. This speed allowed the mine to enter water cleanly, sink to the bottom, and activate its sensors without damage from impact shock. The parachutes were designed to separate from the mine body upon water entry, sinking separately to avoid creating visible indicators of mine locations. B-29 crews received specialized training at Wendover Field in Utah, where they practiced low-altitude precision drops over Salt Lake. The mines had to be placed in specific locations within harbors and channels to create effective barriers without clustering so tightly that minesweeping operations could clear multiple weapons simultaneously. Mission planning utilized detailed hydrographic charts created by Navy cartographers, showing water depths, current patterns, and traffic channels for every major Japanese port. These charts incorporated pre-war Japanese survey data, information from captured documents, and intelligence from submarine periscopes photographs taken during reconnaissance missions. The result was targeting information more precise than what conventional bombing missions required, with drop zones marked to within 200-foot circles. The first mission launched on March 27, 1945, from Guam and Tinian. 92 B-29s from the 313th Bombardment Wing departed between 1800 and 2000 hours for the 2,800-mile round trip to Shimonoseki Strait. Each aircraft carried 7 Mark 25 mines, and crews had been briefed that this mission was experimental, that the mines might prove ineffective, and that Japanese defenses would likely increase once the campaign pattern became clear. Major Howard Jarrell, piloting the lead aircraft, approached Shimonoseki at 5,000 feet with minimal defensive fire. Japanese commanders, observing B-29s flying unusually low without releasing incendiaries, assumed the aircraft were conducting reconnaissance or perhaps experiencing mechanical problems that prevented reaching normal bombing altitude. The 92 aircraft dropped 614 mines across the strait in a pattern that created 3 overlapping barrier fields. Within 72 hours, Japanese shipping through Shimonoseki had ceased completely. Captains attempting the passage reported mysterious explosions beneath vessels in previously safe channels. Ships that had transited the strait successfully for years suddenly detonated mines in waters that Japanese naval charts showed as clear. The psychological impact matched the physical destruction because crews couldn't see the threat, couldn't determine safe routes through visual observation, and couldn't rely on any navigation techniques that had previously worked. The strait that carried 80% of Japan's domestic seaborne traffic between the home islands and the Asian mainland became impassable overnight. Japanese Naval Command in Tokyo received reports of the new threat on March 29th with a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. Captain Atsushi Oi, chief of the Naval General Staff's Operations Section, assembled intelligence reports from multiple sources to understand what was happening. The American aircraft weren't bombing in the conventional sense. They were dropping objects that created explosions beneath ships hours or days after the aircraft departed. Initial theories suggested delayed action bombs, but the pattern didn't match. The weapons appeared to detonate specifically when ships passed overhead, suggesting some kind of triggering mechanism sensitive to ship presence. The technical sophistication implied was disturbing because it required sensors, electronics, and manufacturing precision that Japan's intelligence services had not believed American industry could deliver in operational quantities. The Japanese response reveals the asymmetric nature of mining warfare. Clearing mines required specialized equipment and trained personnel that Japan possessed in inadequate numbers. The Imperial Japanese Navy operated approximately 280 minesweepers in March 1945, mostly converted fishing vessels and auxiliary craft equipped with acoustic hammers and magnetic cables. These vessels had been designed to clear contact mines, simple weapons that detonated when a ship physically struck protruding horns. Influence mines that sensed ships without requiring contact demanded entirely different countermeasures involving ships that could trigger the sensors while remaining far enough away to survive the explosion. Japanese engineers understood magnetic minesweeping in theory. The technique required dragging powerful electromagnets through suspected mine areas to simulate the magnetic signature of a steel hull. When mines sensed the magnetic field, they would detonate harmlessly behind the minesweeper. But constructing electromagnets powerful enough to trigger mines from safe distances required copper wire, electrical generating equipment, and technical expertise that Japan's depleted industrial base struggled to provide. Copper had been rationed since 1943, with available supplies directed toward aircraft wiring and communications equipment. Generating equipment required precision manufacturing and quality steel alloys that were in critically short supply. The minesweeping equipment that Japanese factories produced in early 1945 often lacked sufficient power to trigger mines from beyond lethal blast radius, meaning minesweepers frequently detonated the weapons they were attempting to clear. Acoustic minesweeping presented similar challenges. The technique required dragging noise-making devices through mine areas to trigger acoustic sensors, but the Mark 25's acoustic sensor was sophisticated enough to distinguish between genuine ship propellers and artificial noisemakers, often ignoring the sweeping gear while detonating beneath actual merchant vessels that followed. Japanese minesweeping commanders reported frustrating experiences where their sweeps would pass through areas multiple times without triggering mines, only to have a cargo ship sink in the supposedly cleared channel hours later. The Americans had created weapons that required minesweeping technology Japan didn't possess and couldn't develop quickly enough to matter. The mining campaign expanded systematically after Shimonoseki's success. On April 5th, 92 B-29s mined the approaches to Yokosuka Naval Base, dropping 658 mines in patterns that blocked the primary fleet anchorage. On April 12th, 88 aircraft mined Kobe Harbor, Japan's sixth largest port and a major industrial center. On April 30th, the campaign reached Tokyo Bay itself, with 65 B-29s planting 462 mines across the primary shipping channels serving Japan's capital. By May 1st, every major port on Japan's Pacific coast had been mined, and the campaign was expanding to secondary harbors, fishing ports, and any waterway where Japanese vessels might attempt to operate. The economic impact manifested within weeks. Japanese domestic shipping, which had moved 3.2 million tons of cargo monthly in January 1945, dropped to 1.7 million tons in April and 800,000 tons in May. By June, coastal shipping had effectively ceased, except for small boats operating in shallow waters where mines couldn't be planted. The statistics tell a story of systematic strangulation. Coal shipments from Hokkaido to Honshu, which totaled 420,000 tons in February, dropped to 190,000 tons in April and 45,000 tons in June. Food imports from Korea, which had averaged 290,000 tons monthly through 1944, dropped to 87,000 tons in May and 22,000 tons in July. Iron ore shipments from Manchuria ceased entirely after April 15th, when the last convoy attempting the Sea of Japan crossing lost 4 out of 7 vessels to mines in Tsugaru Strait. The human consequences appeared first in urban areas dependent on imported food. Tokyo's population received 1,940 calories per capita daily in January 1945 through official ration systems. By June, that figure had dropped to 1,340 calories, below the level necessary to sustain normal physical activity. Osaka's rations declined from 1,820 to 1,180 calories daily. Hiroshima, ironically, maintained slightly better rations at 1,450 calories through July because local agricultural production supplemented imports, though this would provide no protection against what was coming in August. The Japanese government's own nutrition surveys, recovered after the war, documented weight loss averaging 12 pounds per adult male between March and July 1945, with higher losses among manual labourers who required more calories but received the same rations as office workers. Industrial production collapsed in parallel with food supply. Japanese factories in 1945 depended entirely on imported coal because domestic production, primarily from Hokkaido mines, couldn't reach factories in Honshu without coastal shipping. Steel mills in Osaka and Kobe reduced operations by 60% in May due to coal shortages. Aircraft engine production, which had already been disrupted by American conventional bombing, dropped an additional 40% in June because aluminum smelters lacked electricity from coal-fired power plants. The Mitsubishi factories in Nagoya, which produced Ki-84 fighters, reduced output from 280 aircraft monthly in March to 110 in June, not primarily because of bomb damage, but because aluminum, steel, and electrical power were unavailable in quantities that allowed normal production schedules. The mathematical reality was straightforward and inexorable. Japan's entire war economy rested on the assumption that merchant ships could move between ports safely and frequently. When mines closed the ports, the economy didn't slow gradually. It crashed suddenly because there were no alternatives. Railroads couldn't carry bulk cargo like coal and grain in sufficient quantities. Trucks required fuel that wasn't available in adequate supplies and couldn't operate efficiently on Japan's limited road network. Air transport was absurdly expensive and impractical for bulk commodities. The only option was ships, and ships couldn't operate in mined waters without minesweeping. And Japan lacked the minesweeping capacity to clear American mines faster than American aircraft could lay them. The campaign's cost efficiency was extraordinary by any measure of military economics. Between March 27th and August 15th, 1945, B-29 forces flew 1,528 mine-laying sorties and dropped 12,053 mines in Japanese waters. Total mines lost to anti-aircraft fire, mechanical failure, or misdropped weapons was 462, giving a successful emplacement rate of 96.2%. These 11,591 successfully planted mines sank or damaged 670 Japanese vessels, totaling 1,250,000 tons, including 83 combat ships. The mines also created indirect losses by forcing ships to take longer routes through presumably safe waters, increasing fuel consumption and reducing effective carrying capacity. Ships that previously made round trips between Korea and Japan in 4 days now required 9 to 12 days for the journey, cutting effective fleet capacity by more than half even before accounting for vessels actually sunk. The direct cost per enemy ship sunk was $35,000 in mining operations, compared to $420,000 for submarine torpedo attacks and $890,000 for conventional bombing missions that achieved similar results. This calculation includes aircraft operating costs, crew training, mine manufacturing, and support infrastructure. The economic value destroyed, however, far exceeded the direct costs. The average Japanese merchant vessel in 1945 was worth approximately $280,000. The 670 vessels sunk or damaged represented $187 million in destroyed shipping. But the true impact came from economic paralysis. Japanese ports that had handled $14 billion worth of cargo annually were effectively closed for 5 months. The food that didn't reach cities, the coal that didn't reach factories, the steel that wasn't produced because raw materials couldn't arrive, these secondary effects multiplied the campaign's impact far beyond the immediate ship losses. Japanese military planners understood the strategic disaster unfolding, but lacked means to counter it effectively. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, commander of the combined fleet's remaining surface forces, assessed the situation in a May 15th report to Naval General Staff. His analysis, recovered from Japanese archives in 1947, demonstrated clear understanding of the mathematical impossibility of Japan's position. American mining has rendered our coastal waters impassable without extensive minesweeping operations, that we cannot perform at required scale. Our minesweeping forces lack adequate equipment and numbers. Training new minesweeping crews requires 6 to 8 months we do not have. Even if we could clear the mines already planted, American aircraft plant new mines faster than we can sweep. The mathematical differential is decisive. We can clear perhaps 40 mines daily across all our forces. They plant 200 to 300 mines nightly. The gap widens continuously. Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, Navy Minister in the Suzuki cabinet, reached similar conclusions from a different perspective. His diary entries from June 1945 reveal the progressive collapse of Japan's strategic position. June 3rd. Coastal shipping has essentially ceased. Food situation in cities becomes critical within 45 days at current consumption rates. June 11th. Steel production dropped 73% since March due to coal shortage. Aircraft production collapsing despite factories remaining intact. June 24th. Emperor privately inquired about possibilities of continuing resistance. I could not provide encouraging assessment. The mines have accomplished what conventional bombing could not. They have severed the arteries that allowed Japan to function as industrial nation. The American planners who designed Operation Starvation had predicted these effects with remarkable accuracy. Commander Ellis Johnson's initial proposal in December 1944 included economic projections that proved nearly exact. He estimated that closing Japan's ports would reduce industrial production by 60% within 90 days and create food shortages in urban areas by day 120. The actual figures were 67% reduction in industrial output by day 89 and critical food shortages by day 114. Johnson's analysis, declassified in 1971, reveals sophisticated understanding of Japan's economic vulnerabilities. Japan imports 20 million tons of cargo annually through a merchant fleet of 2.8 million tons capacity. This requires each vessel to make 7.1 voyages annually, or approximately one voyage every 51 days. Mining that extends voyage times beyond 60 days, or reduces available shipping below 2.3 million tons, will create cargo deficit that must be absorbed through reduced industrial activity or reduced civilian consumption. Given political realities, consumption will be reduced first, creating food crisis before industrial collapse. Food crisis will accelerate war termination more effectively than industrial disruption. The submarine force, which had pioneered the strangulation of Japan's merchant marine, recognized Operation Starvation's superior efficiency with professional admiration and slight jealousy. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Pacific Fleet submarines, noted in his June 1945 report that mines were achieving per-sortie kill rates exceeding submarine averages while risking fewer personnel. A submarine patrol required 60 crew members at sea for 50 days and consumed 37,000 gallons of diesel fuel, while facing significant danger from Japanese anti-submarine forces that had become increasingly competent through experience. A B-29 mining sortie required 11 crew members airborne for 14 hours and consumed 7,400 gallons of fuel while facing minimal opposition from Japanese fighters that were increasingly grounded by fuel shortages. The submarines had proven that Japan could be strangled by maritime interdiction. The mines proved that strangulation could be achieved more efficiently from the air. Japanese civilians experienced Operation Starvation not as distant strategic abstraction, but as immediate personal crisis. Takashi Nagai, a radiologist in Nagasaki, whose memoir survived the atomic bombing, recorded the mining campaign's impact in diary entries from June 1945. June 8th. Rice ration reduced again, now 280 grams daily per person. My children are constantly hungry. Hospital reduced working hours due to electrical power shortages. We cannot perform surgeries requiring extended lighting. June 19th. Coal allocation cut by half. Hospital cold, despite summer approaching. No hot water except 2 hours daily. June 28th. Fishing boats cannot sail because harbor entrance is mined. Fresh fish unavailable for 3 weeks. Patients' nutrition worsening daily. Many deaths now attributable to malnutrition more than original illness. The differential impact on Japanese society's various segments revealed the campaign's comprehensiveness. Urban residents suffered most because cities depended entirely on imported food. Rural areas with agricultural production faced shortages of manufactured goods, tools, fertilizer, but could produce food locally. The result was internal migration as urban families attempted to evacuate to countryside, creating transportation demand that couldn't be met because fuel for trains and buses was unavailable. School children were evacuated from cities systematically between April and July, separating approximately 450,000 children from their families in recognition that urban food supplies could not sustain both adult workers and dependent children. The social trauma of this forced separation, documented in thousands of post-war memoirs, stemmed directly from the mining campaign's success in severing Japan's food supply lines. Industrial workers faced impossible conditions. Factories demanded production to support military resistance, but workers lacked calories to sustain heavy labor. Daily food rations provided 1,200 to 1,400 calories, while factory work required 2,800 to 3,200 calories to maintain productivity. The result was declining output per worker hour, increasing workplace accidents as exhausted workers made errors, and rising absenteeism as workers left factories to forage for food in surrounding areas. Factory managers' reports from June and July 1945 document this spiral. Mitsubishi Nagoya reported productivity dropped 47% between April and July, despite workforce remaining stable. Kawasaki Kobe documented accident rates increasing by 83% over the same period. Nakajima Tokyo recorded average worker weight declining from 61.2 kilograms in March to 56.7 kilograms in July, with corresponding productivity decreases. The Japanese government's response oscillated between attempted countermeasures and simple denial. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, who assumed office on April 7th specifically to find ways to end the war honorably, faced military leaders who insisted continued resistance remained possible. The army's position, articulated forcefully by War Minister Korichika Anami, held that American casualties from invading Japan would be so catastrophic that negotiated surrender terms could be achieved if Japan demonstrated absolute determination to fight to extinction. This calculation ignored the reality that Operation Starvation made invasion unnecessary. Why lose hundreds of thousands of American troops invading fortified islands when mines could simply starve Japan into submission within months? The Supreme War Council's meetings in June and July 1945 revealed increasing desperation as military and civilian leaders confronted irreconcilable positions. The military insisted honor demanded continued resistance. Civilian ministers presented economic data showing that continued resistance was physically impossible without food and fuel. Emperor Hirohito, reading intelligence reports documenting the mining campaign's effects, understood that American strategy had evolved beyond conventional bombing to economic siege. His intervention in August, overruling military leaders to accept Potsdam Declaration terms, reflected understanding that Japan faced not just military defeat, but national extinction through starvation. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th are often portrayed as the decisive factor in Japan's surrender. The actual decision-making process was more complex. Japanese military leaders had accepted that cities could be destroyed. 66 cities had already burned in conventional incendiary raids. What they hadn't accepted was that Japan's economy could be destroyed without invasion. Operation Starvation proved that point mathematically. The atomic bombs accelerated surrender by days or weeks, but the mining campaign had already created conditions making continued resistance impossible. Cabinet meeting transcripts from August 9th and 10th reveal that discussion focused equally on Soviet entry into the war, atomic bombs, and the impossibility of continuing without maritime transportation, the euphemistic phrase for starvation. The technical success of Operation Starvation influenced post-war naval doctrine profoundly. The United States Navy established mine warfare as a primary capability rather than auxiliary function. The Korean War saw extensive mining of North Korean ports, with B-29s again serving as delivery platforms. The Vietnam War included Operation Pocket Money, which mined Haiphong Harbor using aircraft-delivered mines directly descended from the Mark 25. Modern naval forces maintained sophisticated mine arsenals, including bottom mines, moored mines, and mobile mines that can hunt targets autonomously, all tracing lineage to the weapons that closed Japan's ports in 1945. The campaign's legacy extends beyond military technology to strategic thinking about economic warfare. Targeting an enemy's economic infrastructure rather than military forces directly became recognized as potentially more effective in modern industrial warfare. Japan's experience demonstrated that nations dependent on maritime trade are vulnerable to relatively inexpensive weapons that disrupt shipping without requiring superiority in surface naval forces. This lesson influenced Cold War strategy, where NATO planned extensive mining of Warsaw Pact ports in any conflict, and continues to influence modern military planning, where mine warfare remains a credible threat to maritime commerce. The human cost accounting remains complex and disputed. Operation Starvation directly killed approximately 1,300 Japanese sailors and merchant mariners aboard vessels that struck mines. Indirectly, the campaign contributed to malnutrition conditions that killed an estimated 10,000 to 15,000 Japanese civilians between March and August 1945, primarily elderly and very young, who couldn't survive on reduced rations. These deaths represent tragedy, but must be weighed against alternative scenarios. Operation Downfall's estimated casualties ranged from 1.7 to 4 million Japanese military and civilian deaths, plus 400,000 to 800,000 American casualties. Even continuing conventional bombing and naval blockade without invasion would have killed hundreds of thousands through starvation and disease, extending through 1946. The mining campaign accelerated war's end, reducing total deaths compared to any alternative scenario except immediate unconditional surrender, which Japanese military leadership would not consider until August. The Americans who planned and executed Operation Starvation rarely receive historical recognition comparable to submarine commanders or bomber crews. Commander Ellis Johnson returned to MIT after the war, publishing technical papers on operations research and naval tactics, but his fundamental contribution to Japan's defeat remains largely unknown outside specialized military history circles. The B-29 crews who flew mining missions received less attention than those who flew incendiary raids or atomic missions, despite achieving strategic effects with far less loss of life. This invisibility reflects the operation's essential character: unglamorous, technical, economically focused, achieving victory through mathematics rather than dramatic military action. The final statistics tell the story with mathematical precision. Between March 27th and August 15th, 1945, American aircraft planted 12,053 mines in Japanese waters at total operational cost of $28.3 million. These mines sank or damaged 670 vessels valued at $187 million and effectively closed ports, handling $14 billion in annual cargo. Japanese industrial production declined 67% between March and July, primarily due to mining rather than conventional bombing. Civilian food rations declined from 1,900 to 1,300 calories daily, creating malnutrition conditions that affected 12 million urban residents. The campaign required 1,528 sorties with 15 aircraft losses, a casualty rate of 0.98%, compared to 2.4% for conventional bombing missions. No American mining mission faced significant fighter opposition after April 30th, because Japanese fighters lacked fuel to intercept aircraft that weren't attacking cities. The comparison to other strategic campaigns is instructive. The combined bomber offensive against Germany required 2.7 million tons of bombs, 160,000 sorties, and killed 60,000 Allied aircrew while destroying approximately 40% of German industrial capacity. Operation Starvation required 12,000 tons of mines, 1,528 sorties, killed 165 aircrew, and destroyed 67% of Japanese industrial capacity. The efficiency differential reflects both technological sophistication and strategic insight. American mines were more effective than German mines because of superior sensors. American targeting was more effective than German targeting because operations research identified choke points where maximum economic leverage could be achieved with minimum ordnance. The forgotten dimension involves the mine clearance effort after Japan's surrender. The minesweeping operation required 18 months, from September 1945 to February 1947, employed over 300 vessels including Japanese minesweepers working under American supervision, and cleared only 85% of the mines actually planted. The remaining 15% were never located and remained dangerous to navigation until deterioration rendered them inert in the 1960s. This clearance effort cost $127 million, more than 4 times the original mining campaign cost, validating the economic asymmetry that made mining so effective. Japanese minesweepers working to clear their own harbors detonated 47 mines that killed 234 sweepers, adding post-war casualties to the operation's toll. The broader lesson connects to the fundamental nature of modern warfare between industrial nations. Victory goes not necessarily to the side with the most troops or the best tactics, but to the side that can sustain industrial production and logistics over extended periods. Japan's military forces in August 1945 numbered 6.3 million troops with adequate small arms ammunition, fortifications throughout the home islands, and demonstrated willingness to fight to death. These factors were strategically irrelevant because the forces lacked food, fuel, and industrial support to sustain operations beyond September. Germany's experience had demonstrated similar principles: superior tactical performance, impressive weapons technology, and motivated soldiers could not overcome industrial production disparities of 3-1 to 5-1. Japan's experience added a maritime dimension. Island nations dependent on imports are particularly vulnerable to weapons that interdict sea commerce without requiring command of the sea surface. Operation Starvation demonstrated that unglamorous technical operations executed with mathematical precision can achieve strategic effects exceeding dramatic military actions. The B-29 crews, who burned Tokyo on March 10th, killed more than 100,000 people in one night and received historical attention accordingly. The B-29 crews, who mined Shimonoseki Strait on March 27th, killed 11 sailors that night, but destroyed Japan's economy within 4 months, receiving no comparable recognition. This disparity reflects human tendency to focus on visible dramatic events, rather than invisible systematic processes. Burning cities created images that appeared in newspapers and newsreels. Mines lying on harbour bottoms created no images but made resistance impossible. The individuals who contributed to Operation Starvation's success came from diverse backgrounds reflecting America's industrial mobilization. The mine's magnetic sensors were designed by physicists from universities across the Northeast. The acoustic sensors incorporated work from Bell Labs engineers who normally worked on telephone switching equipment. The Torpex explosive was produced by chemical workers in Tennessee who had been farmers 3 years earlier. The parachute systems were sewn by textile workers in North Carolina who had previously made clothing. The B-29 crews included farm boys from Iowa, mechanics from Detroit, college students from California, united by technical training and shared purpose. This industrial and social mobilization, more than any single weapon system, explains American victory. The operation's conclusion came on August 15, 1945, when Emperor Hirohito's recorded announcement broadcast Japan's surrender to shocked citizens who had been told victory remained possible. In cities across Japan, civilians heard their emperor's voice for the first time, explaining that the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, and that continuing resistance would result in the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation. The euphemistic language obscured harsh reality. Japanese urban residents were starving, industrial production had collapsed, fuel reserves were exhausted, and continuation of war was physically impossible, regardless of military or civilian determination to resist. Operation Starvation had accomplished what strategic bombing, submarine warfare, and naval blockade alone could not. It had made Japan's defeat mathematically certain, and surrender practically inevitable. The American sailors and aviators who planted 12,053 mines around Japan between March and August 1945 destroyed an empire without the need for invasion. Their technically precise, economically focused campaign achieved strategic victory through industrial mathematics rather than military heroism. They deserve recognition not for dramatic actions or impressive kill counts, but for demonstrating that modern warfare's most decisive campaigns are often the most unglamorous, the ones that attack not courage or willpower, but the economic foundations that make continued resistance possible. The mines they planted closed Japan's ports, collapsed its economy, and ended history's most destructive war through the simple arithmetic of supply and demand.